First ka.
The session is resumed. The Secretary will call the roll.
Roll call of members. The Honorable Senators Angara, Aquino, Binay, Cayetano Alan Peter Compañero S., Cayetano Pia S., Defensor Santiago, Ejercito, Enrile, Escudero, Estrada, Gingona, Onasan, Lapid, Legarda, Marcos, Usmeña, Pimentel, Po, Recto, Revilla, Soto, Trillanes, Villar, Senate President Trilon.
13 senators are present. The chair declares the presence of a quorum. The Majority Leader.
Mr. President, with the consent of the Senate, I move that we dispense with the reading of the Journal of the 51st Session, February 10, 2015, and consider the same as approved. So move.
Any objection? Hearing none, the reading of the Journal of Session number 51 is dispensed with, and the same is hereby approved.
Mr. President, I move that we proceed with the reference of business.
Secretary will read the reference of business.
Bills on first reading. Senate number 2639, entitled An Act Declaring every 26th of June of every year as a Philippines-France Friendship Day, by Senator Sani Angara.
Education, Arts and Culture, Finance.
Senate number 2640, an act to prohibit the purchase, ownership, or possession of enhanced body armor by civilians, by Senator Defensor Santiago.
Defense and Security.
Senate number 2641, an act to provide for research with respect to Lyme disease and other tick-borne diseases, by Senator Defensor Santiago.
Health and Demography, Finance.
Senate number 2642, an act prohibiting card issuers from accepting third-party source personal information, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Banks, financial institutions, and currencies.
Senate number 2643, an act prohibiting the practice of sea dumping of sewage, sludge, and industrial waste, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Environment and Natural Resources.
Senate number 2644, an act to authorize public awareness campaigns to promote the persistent quest for knowledge and increased education among youth, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Justice and Human Rights, Youth.
Resolutions. PS Resolution number 1158, directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the report that Congress needs to review the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Law, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Cultural Communities, Environment and Natural Resources.
PS Resolution number 1159, directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the reported water crisis in Butuan City, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Public Works.
PS Resolution number 1160, directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the reported explosion that killed 1 inmate and hurt 19 others in the National Bilibid Prison, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Justice and Human Rights.
PS Resolution number 1161, directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the reported discoveries and recoveries of crashed drones allegedly owned by the U.S. Navy, which have been found in different territorial seas of the Philippines, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Foreign Relations, National Defense and Security.
PS Resolution number 1162, directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation to investigate the increasing incidence of hepatitis B in the Philippines, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Health and Demography.
PS Resolution number 1163, directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the reported rampant drug trade inside New Bilibid Prison perpetrated by notorious drug lord inmates, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Justice and Human Rights, Public Order and Dangerous Drugs.
PS Resolution number 1164, directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the report that the light rail transit LRT suffered a ticket shortage, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Public Services.
PS Resolution number 1165, directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the report that the PayPal security members did not get right amount of their allowance, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Public order and dangerous drugs.
Yes, resolution number 1166 directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the report that elderly women are used as drug mules by drug syndicates, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Public order, dangerous drugs, social justice, welfare, and rural development.
Yes, resolution number 1167 directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the reported marine poaching activity in Cavite, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Agriculture and food, environment and natural resources.
Yes, resolution number 1168 directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the report that 20 Filipino seafarers were found deprived of food in a detained ship abroad, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Labor, employment, human resources, development, and foreign relations.
Yes, resolution number 1169 directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the report that an Australian tourist killed a Filipina mistaken for a transgender, by Senator Defensor Santiago.
Women, family relations, and gender equality.
Yes, resolution number 1170 directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the report that teachers are opposing Saturday makeup classes.
Education,
Senator
arts, and
Defensor Santiago.
culture.
Yes, resolution number 1171 directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the recent Commission audit report which found that the Philippine Normal University had millions of unutilized disbursement acceleration program DAP funds in 2013. Senator
Finance,
Defensor Santiago.
education, arts, and culture.
Yes, resolution number 1172 directing the proper Senate committee to conduct inquiry of legislation the recent Commission on audit that the Philippine Navy entered into procurement contracts without public bidding.
Defense and security.
Yes, resolution number 1173 directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry of legislation on the significant failure of the National Printing Office in the management of its accounts based on the recently released 2013 report of the COA.
Accountability of public officers and investigations.
Yes, resolution number 1174 directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the recent COA report that the Philippine Charities Sweepstakes Office failed to remit a total of 959.5 million of its earnings in 2012 to the National Treasury and has several unexplained accounting irregularities of hundreds of millions of pesos.
Government corporations, public enterprises, games, amusements, and sports.
PS resolution number 1175 directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the report that the Commission audit is questioning the Home Development Mutual Fund or Pag-ibig Fund for spending 1.9.
Government corporations and public enterprises.
This resolution number 1176 directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation in the COA reports that the Philippine PhilHealth had been granting unauthorized bonus allowances to its officers, employees, and private contractors.
Government corporations and public enterprises.
Yes, resolution number 1177 directing the Senate committee on public services to conduct an inquiry in aid and assessment in aid of legislation towards crafting a comprehensive, integrated, and interdisciplinary approach in road management with the end of enacting legislation that will address road problems.
Public Works. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move that the Minority Leader, Senator Vicente Soto, be recognized to speak on a matter of public interest.
Senator Soto is recognized.
Mr. President, thank you. Mr. President, my esteemed colleagues, my topic may not belong to the genre of today's headlines, but I consider it no less important. Sovereignty and justice may be the issues of the day, but judging from the slogans of a time not too long ago, food on the table and jobs for all do occupy and will always occupy our people's minds. Food and freedom, jobs and justice go hand in hand. Mr. President, last month was the 20th anniversary of our entry into the WTO GATT, the World Trade Organization and the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. 20 years and 59 days ago, December 14, 1994, to be specific, the Philippines, through the 9th Congress of the Philippine Senate entered into the World Trade Organization. This milestone of 2 decades should be long enough for us to assess its impact in our people and economy. Affordable food on the Filipino table and access to available jobs for the Filipino farmer and laborer had been at risk since we joined the World Trade Organization. When the Senate voted with 18 affirmative votes, there were 5 who voted for the negative side. For the record, they were Senator Arturo Tolentino, Senator Ernesto Maceda, Senator Dominic Coseteng, Senator Wigberto Tañada, and Senator Vicente Soto III. I distinctly remember the last portion of my speech on my negative vote, and together with those words, I was fervently praying and hoping deep within me that I was wrong. I could almost hear the words of my friends who are farmers in Nueva Ecija, who asked me to look after their welfare as we were about to join the WTO. I shared their fear that our entry into the arena of world economics without adequate safeguards may adversely affect available jobs, markets for our products, and our people's standard of living. Simple lamang naman po ang naging pananaw ko noon eh. Nung bumoto po ako ng laban sa pagsanib natin sa WTO. Ang kaisipan ko po noon ay bunga ng aking pangambang walang laban ang maliliit na bansa na makipagkompetensya sa mga higanting bansa sa larangan ng ekonomiya kung hindi tayo bibigyan ng konting partida. Ganyan po sa sports sa larangan ng palakasan Pag hindi po magkapantay ang mga manlalaro, tiyak na may madidihado. Kumbaga sa basketball, ang iba pang Olympics ang kanilang kakayahan. Samantalang ang iba, panliga lang ng mga barangay ang kakayahan. Sa larangan ng boxing, may weight class Hindi pwedeng ilaban yung flyweight sa heavyweight Sa golf naman, mayroong sistemang handicapping. In the free-for-all world of economics, the economic giants would always win. When a big mall opens in a city or town plaza, the sari-sari stores nearby are bound to lose sales and customers. Mr. President, our rice supply alone is import-dependent despite attempts at self-sufficiency. Our fruit and vegetable growers are constantly under threat of foreign products being dumped here at much lower prices despite their additional cost of transportation. Binabiyahe na nga pero mas mura pa sila Imported apples and oranges routinely beat our mango in price and availability. So, Mr. President, let us take a second look into the matter. 20 years is a good time to take stock of how we are faring with real-time experiences against promises and expectations. Sabi nila noon, our farmers and our land-dependent workforce will have nothing to fear, for there are going to be safety nets. I ask, where are the safety nets? What do they consist of in the present time? We were convinced to fly into the WTO membership like flying trapeze artists since there were safety nets. But lo and behold, when our hands were slipping through the rope and bar, the safety nets were not there. And if there were any, there were holes in them. Are we still trapeze artists, Mr. President, or is it time to send in the clowns? It is my submission, Mr. President, that after all these 20 years, that a thorough assessment be made of the impact to us of our entry into the World Trade Organization by the National Economic Development Authority, or the NEDA, and the Department of Trade and Industry, and the Intellectual Property Office. Only by looking back can we move forward, as the Filipino saying goes. Salamat po. Thank you, Mr. President, my esteemed colleagues.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, there are no senators who wish to interpellate. So, with the consent of Senator Soto, I move that we refer the speech to the Committee on Trade and Commerce and Economic Affairs.
So referred.
Okay. Mr. President, with the consent of the Senate, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Joint Resolution number 12 under Committee Report number 99. This is the legislative bill on the electricity imbalance in the Luzon grid, Mr. President.
Consideration of proposed Senate Joint Resolution number 12 under Committee Report 99 is in order.
Mr. President, the sponsor, Senator Osmeña, had delivered his sponsorship speech on the measure yesterday, February 10. I thus move that we open the period of interpellations.
The period for debates, period of interpellation, is in order. The Chair recognizes the principal sponsor, Senator Sergio Osmeña, the principal sponsor of the measure.
Mr. President, there are no senators who wish to interpolate. Senate, I withdraw my statement and I move that we recognize the Minority Leader, Senator Soto.
The Minority Leader is recognized in the period of interpellation.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the distinguished gentleman from Cebu answer a few questions?
With pleasure.
Thank you. Mr. President, at the outset, allow me to place it on record. I originally had reservations on the granting of emergency powers to the President. But knowing that the gentleman from Cebu is the one reporting it out, and reading through what he has reported out, I am somehow relieved. And therefore, perhaps some more questions would practically remove any apprehension I would have on the matter. So let me start with asking the distinguished sponsor that notwithstanding this resolution, what is our assurance that the executive will comply on all the laws on the matter, particularly EPIRA, the Biofuels Act, and the Oil Deregulation Law, among others?
Thank you for that, Mr. President. The House, in their rush, did not have enough time to study ways and means that we could increase the availability of power in the grid. And when they passed their version of the joint resolution on December 21, they used the shotgun approach, where they put a lot of exemptions, blanket exemptions from various laws. For example, including mitigating measures adopted, including the WESM, Republic Act 9367 or the Biofuels Act, Republic Act 8749, the Clean Air Act, the Philippine Grid Code, the Philippine Distribution Code. And there were several objections from the environmental activist sector why such exemptions were being granted. And I assured them that they would not need to be done, but just to be patient and wait for the Senate to finish with all its homework. And so in our actual resolution, there is no exemption from any law. There is, however, Mr. President, a companion bill which will exempt from the Biofuels Act the plants that use the natural gas from Malampaya, because their alternative fuel is diesel. And unfortunately, under the Biofuels Act, pure diesel cannot be utilized anymore anywhere in the Philippines. It must be biodiesel. However, the plants were manufactured in 2001 before Congress passed the biofuels law. And so therefore they're not geared to deal efficiently with biodiesel, which clogs their the filters. And so the operators of the plant, in this particular case, KEPCO, Korea Electric Power Company, which owns the 1,200 megawatt gas plant called Ilihan, derates their plants to 420 instead of 600. So we have got a loss just on one plant of 180 megawatts. Two plants, that's 360 megawatts. If, however, they told me we can use pure diesel, then we can probably bring up the rating to about 550 megawatts per plant, or 1,100 overall. We met with them 2 times, and two or three times, and they assured us that this is so, because when they tested the plant in the beginning, it was brand new, using pure diesel, they were running at the full 600 megawatt installed capacity. So that is the only exemption that from existing law that we seek in consonance with the joint resolution.
And that will come in a companion bill, as you said.
It will
Did I
be
hear you
filed.
right?
It should be filed by Monday, Your Honor.
I see. Okay, right. All right, thank you. Now, speaking of the executive, what is our assurance that the President will not exceed the boundaries of the resolution?
Well, if you will read the resolution, we've covered a lot of the gray areas, actually to mandate the executive to do certain things rather than to prevent them from doing certain things. Executive power can always be abused, and there's no assurance that this will not be done in this case. But I am happy to report that we have worked with the Secretary of Energy on this, aside from the PSALM and the ERC and Meralco, and they have been very cooperative. And the Secretary texted me yesterday. He was in Baguio, but he said they're fully supportive of this resolution.
You mentioned the House version of the Senate, of the joint resolution, no? Would it be more or less the same as what the Malacanang requested, the House version? And compared to what you are sponsoring now, what would be the difference?
All right,
or comparison?
this is the way I will answer that. It's not exactly the same as reading of both resolutions, but they're very similar. They're equal in the thrust to increase generation capacity. Now, the two big differences between the House and the Senate is the House included suspension of the operability of pertinent laws, rules, and regulations. We did not do that. And the second would be that they made it mandatory for self-generating facilities to participate in the interruptible load program. And I've always been against making it mandatory, because every situation is unique. and we've been able to get explanations from the individual who own these generating sets. They're of different age, they have different fuel supplies. Iba-iba po yan. Pag sinabi mo you have to participate, then they would tend to back out, and which is why it has been slow in coming. But so far, Mr. President, we can look up upon a universe of about 1,400 megawatts before the end of this month.
All right. Be that as it may, I'm sure we'll be able to guarantee that in the BICAM, the Senate version and your version will probably be the main version. Now, given that, do you think this will be sufficient to address any potential shortages this summer? Electricity
All right, let
shortages?
me define what a shortage is, Your Honor. But let me first give the chamber a background. The most important number is what they call the peak demand. And the peak demand moves every day, every hour. So what we look for, what we try to determine, what we try to compute is what is the highest demand on the hottest day, on the hottest hour. And that is projected to be 9,000 megawatts around April and May of this year. Yun lang. The rest of the time, that demand level is below 9,000. As a matter of fact, if we took an average for the month of April and May this year, it will be about 8,700 megawatts. But still, we want to cover the hottest day, so
Average,
our target is 9,000 megawatts. Now, these people don't yet understand. Having 9,000 megawatts, you're guaranteed to have a brownout, because there's always a certain number of plants that break down, and there's also a certain number of plants that go on scheduled maintenance. There is no plant that can operate continually or continuously the entire year. So therefore, the grid code mandates that 4% of the peak demand, of the highest peak demand, should be kept in reserve as regulating, what they call a regulating reserve. Then another amount, this in Luzon is 647 megawatts, equivalent to the largest single power generating unit in the grid, which is SWAL. And then there's a third level, another 647 megawatts. So the highest priority is the regulating reserve, then 647, what they call contingency reserve, and another 647 of what they call dispatchable reserves. Now, the difference is when you have something between the second level and the last level, there's no emergency called in. But the moment the reserve power, the dependable capacity goes, yung inubos na yung 647 at tumatama na sa second group, then they issue what is known as a yellow alert. And the moment
And
it reaches, pag naubos yun and the dependable capacity goes down to about 350 megawatts, a red alert is called into action. However, in the yellow alert, the systems operator, in this case the NGCP, the National Grid Corporation of the Philippines, can now call certain plants known as must-run units to start the engines. They won't be delivering power, but they will be paid for capacity fees on a per kilowatt hour for being on standby already. In answer to your question, we have reserves. So therefore, I would say that we must stay close to 10,700 megawatts
to be sufficient
on the hottest day, so that we will be ready to deal with any breakdown during that time. Now, yellow alert is only 900 megawatts. So we will have spinning reserves, and that's what the ILP, at the request of the Secretary of Energy, i-trigger na natin yung ILP sa yellow alert lang. Kasi sa Cebu ho at sa Davao, where we've been utilizing the ILP, they trigger it only on red alert. Therefore, brownout na. Brownout, pagkatapos tatawagan yung mga participants at o sige, i-start up mo na.
Ilang megawatts ang red alert?
In the Luzon grid, based on a peak demand of 900, 4%, 360 megawatts.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. President, for that very enlightening and educational points that you were able to bring up also. Now, finally, just I just want to pick your mind, Mr. President.
Can the gentleman on the floor speak a little louder? The chair cannot hear.
I am almost swallowing my microphone, Mr. President.
Yeah, maybe if we can have only one session in the session hall, we can hear each other better.
I move to adjourn the session in front and the one on the side, Mr. President.
There are 3 sessions going on at the same time, so it's difficult to listen to the debates.
Mr. President, my motion. Move to adjourn the session. The one on the right, in front. I just want to pick the mind of the gentleman, Mr. President. One more time.
Yeah.
From a long-term perspective, what do you think should the executive do to push for the construction of more power plants in the Philippines to avoid emergency powers? Ano sa tingin mong dapat gawin ng Executive Department?
All right, background, Mr. President. There is no lack of interest and no lack of investors in our power development program. Excuse me, can we... There is no lack of interest nor lack of investors. The problem is in the approval process. Let me give you an example. About 2012, ready to go was a 600 megawatt coal plant in Subic. Unfortunately, a militant group filed a writ of Kalikason. And so it was only lately that the Supreme Court threw the case out because the proponents already won about a year and a half ago, but there was an MR. And Supreme Court said there's no basis for issuing a writ of Kalikasan and the project may proceed. That would have been finished by this year. That's a 600 megawatt coal plant. And we would not be looking at such a terrific shortage this year. However, because of things like that, the process is so long delayed that we've asked the executive time and again to orchestrate and coordinate these things. They need to obtain 162 signatures. Said, can we not telescope that process? You've got problems with the
162 signatures.
That's correct. You need permits at barangay level, permits at the municipal level, permits from the DNR. You need your ECC. You need
NEDA pa yan.
ERC, NEDA, DOE. After all is said and done, 2 years will have passed. And construction time is usually 39 to 42 months for a coal plant. So that's another 3.5 years. So unless they telescope the permitting time, you cannot really telescope the construction period. But the time required to pull all the permits, then it will be difficult. Secondly, Mr. President, there are difficulties even getting basic approvals from the local. And I will say this because they start asking for a hospital and they start asking for a port, and it becomes very expensive that they shop around. For example, in Mindanao, I know 3 or 4 groups that had to go to maybe 15 or 20 mayors before they finally found a mayor that would be friendly or more friendly than the others. Life being what it is, you and I know that if the executive does not get involved, things would tend to drag, and we must stop that. However, I can count about 15 foreign players, big ones that have invested here, and about 9 to 10 new local
Really?
players. Yes. For example, Ayala Court, never in power before. They now have 3 or 4 projects ongoing, including that wind project up north in Ilocos Norte, the land of our fellow senator. Their partners also in TransAsia, a new 135 megawatt coal plant that was just commissioned last November. They're now partners, 600 megawatt coal plant in the construction, in the proposal and the construction of a new 600 megawatt coal plant in Causwagan, Lanao Norte. They bought into GN Power, which operates the 600 megawatt coal plant in Mariveles. So they have a 50% share there. Of course, San Miguel is in the picture. Gotianum is constructing a 460 megawatt coal plant in Tibidec in Mindanao. GT Power, which was never in power before. This is the George T Group. They've got several plants in Panay and Cebu. Maraming malalaki ngayon na sumasali. TransAsia, which was never in power, has just finished a 52 megawatt windmill project in Guimaras and also owns 50% of the new plant in TransAsia plant in Batangas. So there are so many, Mr. President, that to say that the APIRA has driven them away. No, the APIRA has practically invited them to come in because the APIRA guarantees, okay, the government will not compete with you anymore. We will let the free market decide, and there will be less headaches for you now. Noon po, pag kalaban mo ang gobyerno, I'm selling power at 4 pesos, there's an outcry, the president comes in and say, sell the power at 3 pesos. So lumalaki ang utang ng napo ko. And so when the Congress decided in 2001 to introduce reforms in the electric power industry, it consciously said, government is now out following the model of the United Kingdom and New South Wales, Australia and Chile and Peru and Brazil and Argentina, and now anybody can put up a power plant. There are about 600 applications for solar, wind, hydropower. Of course, not all of them will come into being because many of them are flippers. In other words, kumuha lang ng rights para binibenta. But other than that, I think we can be assured there's more than enough. However, it's the process that turns people off, the approvals process.
One final question on that specific. As I said, I was picking your mind, Mr. President. What do you think of the Bataan nuclear power plant?
I don't think of it. Why?
What do you think should be done with it? Should it be
All right.
should it be activated, mothballed?
Well, it is mothballed, no?
Yes.
Now, there are political and there are practical problems. First, the political, and I've met with former Congressman Mark,
Yes.
and his wife on this 2 or 3 times. Sabi ko kay Mark, your first problem is the social acceptability. After what happened to Fukushima,
Yes.
I said, you're going to have people saying, yes, we like nuclear power. No, not in my backyard. All right?
Yeah.
So solve that first, and then we can go to the rest. Now, the second but practical problem is there is no country in the world that has established a nuclear waste facility. So it's a long life, say 50 years, but at the end of that, you've got some nuclear waste to bury for all eternity. And there's no country that accepts nuclear waste. So every country that has its own nuclear plants have to have their own disposal units.
Disposal, yes.
Third, the lead time for a nuclear plant is about 10 years, much longer than, because of all the international permits you also have to get, and the care that goes into the construction of the plant. Now, the capital cost is quite high, but the operating cost is the lowest in the industry. Napakamura niyan, pero malaki yung capital cost. But here's the fourth problem. The decommissioning cost is as much as the capital cost. In other words, it has a life. And after that life,
Yes.
you'll have to get rid of all the walls and building materials, and you'll have to bury them.
And that is
so
very expensive.
It's super expensive.
Yes.
And Mr. President, to say, develop a nuclear plant in the United States, I don't know if they allow it again, you not only have to put up the capital cost, because otherwise you won't be able to construct it. You have to put up already the commissioning the decommissioning,
At the end of the day.
because like our mines, sasabihin nila broke na kami, so nakatiwangwang doon yung mga butas na ng mga mining companies, and they never clean up afterwards. So in the United States, there's no way you can get away with that. You put up the money for cleanup.
I think I got the answer from the gentleman, Mr. President. The mothballing will continue. Anyway, thank you very much for accommodating my questions. I have
thank
no
you.
further questions on the Senate Joint Resolution, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Soto.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, a number of our colleagues, including Senator Pia Cayetano, Senator Miriam Santiago, have expressed their desire to interpolate on this resolution. So, now ka? So I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Joint Resolution number 12 under Committee Report number 99 in the meantime. Mr.
Before we act on the motion of the Majority Leader, Senator Grace Poe is raising her hand and would like to be recognized
I withdraw my
on this
motion.
period, so the Majority Leader can withdraw his motion. Senator
withdraw.
Grace Poe is recognized on the period of interpolation.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just have a few questions on the Senate Joint Resolution number 12.
I yield.
Senate Joint Resolution number 12 is an offshoot of the letter requested the President to Congress, Mr. President. So is this Senate Joint Resolution strictly in conformity with what the Executive Department wants?
It has the same goals. It will have even a more efficient achievement of those goals. It will be much cheaper than what the Palace was recommending. And lastly, it will ease up the pending shortage of that is supposed to occur this summer. So is it exactly the same? No, it's not exactly the same. But if you read both resolutions, you'll see it does not contradict except for two areas. One, we're not giving blanket authority and exemption from existing laws such as the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act. And two, we're not making it mandatory. It is more effective when it is voluntary because everybody is going to be suffering from the same brownout. And if they cooperate with the Department of Energy, then it can be orchestrated such as there is an orderly release of electricity. So is it different? Yes, it's different, but
It's better.
I think it's better, yes.
Second, sir, Mr. President, are the measures provided for this in the joint resolution, in this joint resolution, effective in achieving the objective sought by the President, that is to address the imminent shortage in the supply of power in the Luzon grid during the summer months of this year? So I assume it is, if you say that it is similar to what the Palace wants, but not exactly the same means of achieving it, Mr. President.
That is correct. For example, the House resolution, which is what the palace wanted, indicates in the second whereas, yes, in the third whereas clause, that in week 14 of the year 2015, a maximum projected shortfall of 782 megawatts, of which so and so, etc., is, well, it's split into two groups. Well, we have been able, generally speaking, we have been able to harness about 1,400 megawatts. About 300, I'll give you round numbers, about 300 megawatts from the captive market of Meralco, another 500 megawatts from the RESA, which is a new subsector of the electricity sector, the retail electricity supplier. So that's 800. Then we have an additional 440 megawatts coming from the directly connected customer. And these are the biggies like Hanjin and Texas Instruments, etc. There's another 140 megawatts available in the PESAs, in the industrial zones. And then the government has some illegal plants, gensets, totaling 79 megawatts. By illegal, meaning they've never registered this as mandated with the ERC. For example, Congress of the Philippines has about 1.7 megawatts, which they've already now volunteered. And City of Makati has 3 megawatts. So we have a record of all of these, and we're asking them to participate.
So just a curious question. You mean you have to register your generator set for your building, or is it just for an establishment? And
No.
do you have to pay?
Every generator set has to be registered.
Where do
With
you
the
register
ERC.
it? ERC. So just to stress, this will address the power shortage that we are anticipating in the summer months of this year, sir?
It will not totally solve it. And here's the uniqueness of the power industry. You can't tell which plant is going to break down and when. There's no orchestration there. Sometimes, like for example, last week, on one day we had an outage of 3,000 megawatts, which almost gave me a heart attack. Today, it's been running at about 2,500 megawatts. But out of that 2,500 megawatts, 1,000 are normal scheduled maintenance downtime. So this is planned a year in advance. That in February, we're shutting down our plant for 30 days for maintenance, or for 10 days in order to undergo repairs. So scheduled yan. So the NGCP can program it so that they all don't happen at the same time and become a bull. Now, there are those that are chronically down, like GN Power 600 megawatts and Limais 160 megawatts, and Malaya 300 megawatts under repair and rehab, and another 350 that's, you don't know if they're alive or dead. Yan, kina-count out ko na yan. Cannot be depended on. So, as long as we stay at about 10,700 megawatts of dependable capacity during summer, we'll be comfortable, but we're not going to guarantee anything. There is such a thing in the electricity sector. There's a concept called loss of load estimate. In other words, energy experts can look at the grid of a country, and they can estimate, and this is only an estimate, how many events, meaning how many times you lose power during the entire year. The UP's latest study gave us a loss of load estimate of 5, and that was 2 years ago. That's not for this year. I'm sure it's much higher for this year. Now, let me tell you that the Hong Kong, for example, would have a loss of load of once every 2 years, which is fantastic. But then they've got a big reserve, and their plants are kept in good condition. Singapore has a loss of load estimate of once every 10 years. So
That's
they
right.
never really literally lose power. uh, uh, but it will cost us a lot of money because our reserves have got to be more. Like Singapore has a 50% reserve. Ours is only 19.
So, the Senate is in receipt of Joint Resolution number 21, which was approved by the House of Representatives in December last year. In response to the letter, how similar or different is the Senate Joint Resolution from Joint Resolution number 21? Is it how you explained it earlier, which is perhaps you can go into detail why it is much cheaper or better than the version of what Malacanang may be requesting?
Well, the House, because it passed its resolution on December 21, and it was too late to acquiesce to the request of the executive to order 300 megawatts in genset without bidding. Those 300 megawatts, it was openly quoted, would cost 6 billion. Lease lang a 2-year lease for those 300 megawatts would cost us 6 billion pesos. You divide that into 300, that would be 10 million pesos per megawatt per year. If we divide that into all the hours, all the peaking hours during summertime, 13 weeks, that would amount to a usage of 390 hours. You divide 10 million by 390, you will come to 25 pesos per kilowatt hour. That's only for the lease. That doesn't include mobilization costs, installation, demobilization costs, operations and maintenance, and fuel.
How much is the average now per kilowatt hour, sir?
Now, for what?
For energy consumption, aside from...
Well, if you pay your Meralco bill, you'll see it's about 5 pesos to 5.50. But of course, there's socialized pricing. So if you live in the villages, it's much higher. But the small consumer will pay about 5.50. Let's say 5.50. So why pay 35 pesos? They used to 5.50. Now the ILP will cost about 15 pesos less the 5.50. In other words, I will ask Senator Pope, please run your genset tomorrow from 11 o'clock to 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I know it will cost you 15 pesos per hour, less what you would have paid us. I'll pay you a net of 9 pesos per kilowatt hour. Now, if we divide that 9 pesos into all, this is one of the arrangements your Senate committee made, divided in amongst all the customers in the Luzon grid, the cost will be less than 1 centavo per kilowatt hour.
For the ILP, sir?
For the ILP. Now, I'm not talking about the WESM. I cannot estimate what the WESM will cost because Meralco has to buy from WESM kung short sila, no? So, if their contracted capacity is unavailing, then they buy from the WESM, the wholesale electricity spot market.
Sir, just out of curiosity, the scheduled maintenance of power plants, for the record, which agency again has to monitor the schedule?
Walang has to eh. That's another thing that we emphasize now in our resolution. Now you monitor. Because this is a strange thing, but every generating company does not want to tell its competitors what its schedule is, but they have to furnish it to the NGCP. So the NGCP sees all this, and if it sees too much bunching in 1 month, they call them up and say, can you move, because there'll be 3,000 megawatts down that month. That's too much. But they don't really exercise it that strictly because they don't really have the power. They just happen to know, and they can coordinate. And what we want is exercise the power. We want the DOE secretary exercise that power, get that report, every week and make sure that it doesn't happen that because we weren't paying attention, Grace went on vacation at the same time Senator Lauren went on vacation, and all of a sudden we don't have a quorum in the Senate.
But the Department of Energy does not really have the authority to impose on these energy providers to give them a schedule. So if I were producing energy and I don't want the DOE to know about it, I can just withhold information. Is that correct, sir?
That is correct, but they have to tell the NGCP
So that's the
because
way.
the NGCP is the traffic cop.
So the DOE can proactively ask the NGCP,
Yes.
and they don't do that, sir.
Well, they have not done too much of that. That's why we've had certain problems. Like, for example, the price spikes that occurred in November of 2013. There were too many scheduled maintenance also at the same time that Malampaya went out. Now, when you lose Malampaya, that's 2,700 megawatts. I mean,
It didn't raise a red flag with the NGCP, or did they inform anyone in the DOE so the DOE could prepare the consumers, or because it's unscheduled, so there's no way they could.
if it's
afford-
unscheduled, okay lang. There's no way the NGCP
could know.
could know. Only God would know. But
But
if
the
it's
Malam-
scheduled and the NGCP knows, no, they do not normally contact the DOE. I mean, there hasn't been that concern to orchestrate the scheduled maintenance. And so now, they should really pay closer attention to it because of the thinness of our reserves.
Well, I think so. Is there any bill that's pending in the Senate, sir, that could have that provision that requires, let's say, the NGCP?
The resolution will take care of that now.
Okay, thank you.
All right?
Okay. That's all, Mr. President. Thank you, sir.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I believe Senator Legarda wants to ask a few questions. I move for her recognition.
Senator Legarda is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the distinguished sponsor, the expert on energy, sponsor of the resolution, yield to some clarificatory questions to educate this representation?
With pleasure, Mr. President.
Thank you. I just have 3 points, actually 4, very briefly, Mr. President, and just allow me to kindly read the part of the section so that it's also clarified in my mind. The first question is on the suspension of the application of necessary certifications, and that is contained in Section 1A, which provides the following. The Department of Energy, I just put it on record, the DOE, is hereby directed to, and I just have to read it so that it's clear in my mind, issue the necessary department orders and coordinate with other government agencies, including but not limited to the ERC, the Bureau of Customs, the National Irrigation Authority, the PISAM, other relevant local government units to facilitate the issuance of or suspend the application of necessary certifications, permits, licenses, consents, and other authorizations, thereby ensuring that existing committed projects and plans for connection, interconnection, or transmission and rehabilitation of existing generating units will be able to provide additional capacity from March 1, 2015 to July 31, 2015, provided that after July 31, 2015, all such projects, power plants, or generating units shall secure the required permits, licenses, consents, endorsements, and other authorizations. So my question of clarification, Mr. President, based on that is it the intent of this above provision to cover only existing committed projects and plans for connection, interconnection, or transmission and rehabilitation of existing generating units that can provide additional capacity from March 1 to July 31 of 2015? Is it simply for committed projects which are existing, Mr. President?
All right. First, thank you for that question, Mr. President. like you, I'm not happy with the word suspend. If you read it closely, I would have deleted the words or suspend. To facilitate, yes, I think we all agree that facilitation is very important, but suspending, that's too general, it's unclear. However, this is a phrase that was introduced by the Secretary of Energy, so we just put it there, but I intended to bring it up during the BICAM. Secondly, yes, it only covers existing committed projects. So therefore, I'm not too sure, for example, would they now be exempt from obtaining an ECC? So, Mr. President, we'll keep that in mind, and or during the period of amendments, if you wish to move for the deletion of the phrase or suspend, we will look.
I leave it to the better judgment of the good sponsor. I simply wanted to bring it to your attention and to be clarified whether it actually really meant for committed projects, and perhaps provided that these committed projects can actually guarantee the delivery of additional capacity within that period of March 1 to July 31 of 2015. But I leave it to the better judgment of the sponsor.
Well, the committed projects are the 100 megawatt rehab of Millennium Energy in Navotas. They're having problems now between Meralco, and this is something that can be arranged if they talk to each other more often, between Meralco and NGCP, and the connection of an expanded transmission line. And there's some legal things there that I don't quite understand, but it still has to be done. Second, there's the rehabilitation of 30 megawatts in Limay. That's ongoing, and it seems they have no problems. 20 megawatts in Bawang. And the new project, which is guaranteed by Sid Consunji, that will be up and running by March 1, is the 150 megawatt coal plant in Calaca. There is a 100 megawatt gas plant at the Avion, owned by the Lopez Group, but I don't think that they'll be able to make the April 1 or March 1 or March 15 deadline. So I'm not counting that. So that's just about four projects probably that will be affected by this.
And so therefore it means committed projects, but not necessarily guaranteeing the delivery of the additional capacities within the critical months.
Yes, it takes long. So
oh, okay.
And there are always delays, so it's almost impossible to guarantee.
We're actually giving this this provision therefore refers to committed projects, but not necessarily delivering the power within that period. And the sponsor is comfortable with that, and considering the difficulty in coming up, or
I'm not perfectly comfortable with it, and this is certainly a subsection that we shall look more closely at during the BICAM.
Okay. Thank you for that. I simply wanted clarification that, and yes, so perhaps what we could discuss in the BICAM is whether we should limit it only to the committed projects which will guarantee delivery within the critical months, or those which can be constructed but will not deliver power within those months. We're not sure of that, yes. I understand it now. Thank you. May I proceed then to the second, the incentives for self-generating facilities that voluntarily connect. I would read the section just so that it's clear in my mind. Section 1D provides the following: issue the necessary policies and systems of incentives to allow private facilities with self-generating facilities, SGFs, an option to voluntarily connect and inject electric power to the grid or to the DU system for contingency purposes, including the exemption of such SGFs from the must-offer rule of the WESM rules. I would like to know what kind of incentives are being contemplated under this provision, and who will shoulder the cost accruing from such incentives.
This is recommended by one of the agencies, I can't remember which, policies and systems of incentives. There are many types of incentives you can give, monetary incentives, fiscal incentives, etc. And we're leaving it up to the Secretary to determine what these incentives would be. For example, during the time of President Gloria Arroyo, she issued an executive order that would effectively subsidize the consumption of Texas Instrument. When they wanted to expand in Clark, when they were negotiating with the government, they said, all right, but I don't want to pay more than 2 pesos per megawatt or per kilowatt, when everybody was paying 5 pesos. So that was an incentive that Gloria agreed to. And we will have to continue with that if we want them to sign up for the interruptible load program. So that's an example. There are many others. It doesn't quite come to mind so easily, but that's one of the incentive. I think that would be the biggest incentive when you're subsidizing someone to the tune of 100 million or 200 million a year.
Thank you, Mr. President. I proceed now to my third question on the energy efficiency. And if I may also read Section 1H, which mandates improvement in the implementation of the energy efficiency and conservation programs, which is a critical element of the joint resolution. Item 2 of the said provision calls for the integration of energy efficiency plans across the government. As an emergency measure, however, it would be good to provide excuse me, for mandated energy efficiency targets among agencies of the government, such as perhaps 20% reduction of energy consumption level. Estimates indicate that a 5% energy conservation rate for Luzon alone would effectively address half the power deficit for the summer months this year. So the resolution indicates energy efficient plans across the government, but does not, I believe, specify the actual energy conservation program. Is it really envisioned to be very general without specifying?
We're leaving this up to the DOE, but just for the information of the Chamber, I caused the insertion of 150 million pesos in the budget for 2015, and I indicated to the Secretary that this should cover a public information campaign, and we want every man, woman, and child know how to save money by consuming less energy in their households and in their offices. So definitely this is a wide-ranging program, and it should continue for the next 10 years as people will learn how to consume less. Now, just as a matter of principle and as a matter of experience, there is no corporation in the whole world that cannot carry out an order if the boss says, cut all your budgets by 5%. You'll always be able to find a way to make that savings. If somebody told you, for example, cut your household budget by 10%, you'll know, and you'll re-examine your budget, and you'll know, oops, this is something that I don't really need pala. Or look at the number of lights in this hall. If we took out every other alternate bulb, we'd be saving 50% on the electricity that we're now consuming.
Or even reduce the aircon to thermostat
That's correct.
level.
So it's so wide-ranging that we cannot enumerate what they're supposed to do. But it's just keep at it, because there's two ways to make sure there's power available. One is to increase the capacity, build more plants, or two, consume less.
Consume both.
Right.
Yes.
And if you do both, so much the better.
Thank you for that. Because Section 1H4 mandates the Department of Energy to create an energy efficiency framework that is focused on low-income families and or rural communities of the country. This framework should be pursued as a mainstream tool for promoting sustainability in the country's energy system and for promoting environmental goals. The energy efficiency framework should not just focus on low-income families. In fact, the energy efficiency framework should be designed to take into consideration households, businesses, government facilities, national infrastructure, among others. And perhaps this should be part of a national energy security strategy that covers all sectors.
That is correct. I agree with you. A house in Forbes Park, if you ask him to turn off half his light bulbs, we won't have to tell the house in the Barong-Barong who has only 2 light bulbs to turn off one, because by turning off the one in Forbes, the one in the Barong-Barong will be able to keep those lights on, and he needs it more.
Yes.
Because the kids have to study. So yes, you're right.
It should not just focus on the rural and low income.
That's correct.
Yes. Thank you for that, Mr. President. And given that this contemplated emergency powers seek to address an emergency situation covering a limited period of time as stipulated, will this joint resolution have a sunset provision?
No, there's no sunset. We precisely planned it. Even if you see dates, they don't really mean much. All of these provisions will continue indefinitely. And the reason for that is you build the plant, the plant continues operating for the next 25 years now. So why have a sunset provision? The incentives, that really is up to the executive. It's up to the president. The president has about a savings of about, technical savings I call it, of about 75 billion pesos in the Malampaya Fund. And that can only, under the law, under the Gas Act, that can only be utilized for energy-related expenditures. So he has plenty of money. He can energize 100% of the country, and why they're waiting, I don't know.
Meaning, could you kindly educate this representation? If there is no sunset provision, everything that we will approve in both houses will remain unless amended or repealed.
That is correct. There's really no need to insert any sunset provision anywhere here, because the ILP program, the interruptible load program,
Which is the core of this resolution.
yes, is only called into action when there's an impending shortage.
There is no need to suspend it.
No, because suppose a shortage occurs in October, then automatically the ILP is becomes
If there is no
operational.
shortage, there's no ILP.
We've been doing this in Cebu for 5 years already. And the ILP is only activated when there's a shortage, and it's normally during summer, no?
What Your Honor is saying is that we're just applying what has been done in regions in the country, and therefore there is no need to suspend it because it is applicable.
That's right. The ERC promulgated Resolution Number 8, Series of 2010, updated by, again, Resolution Number 8, Series of 2013. And so this is a continuing thing.
Okay. Because of that very important statement, Mr. President, that there is no sunset provision, it is all the more important that we focus on a provision of the House version which suspends some environmental laws. And I am glad, Your Honor, that the sponsor has not included this in the Senate version. And I'm referring to page 3, line 12, 7 to 15 of the House version. I will no longer put it on record, but it specifically calls for the suspension of pertinent laws, rules, regulations, referring to certain laws and enumerating laws, including the Clean Air Act. I would just like to hear from Your Honor whether, never mind, I will not, no need, because it is not included in our version. So
Well,
just a verbal commitment that we are not suspending these environmental laws, including the Clean Air Act.
From the very beginning, I had indicated to my counterpart in the House, Mr. President, that if you put that in there, Lauren is going to block it until she dies. So you get it out. I'm going to have to get it out.
Thank you very much. can I just be educated on the biofuels, which I'm not an expert on. That is, I believe, the only law where you agree there would be a suspension, if I'm not mistaken, when you told me in private.
All right. KEPCO has two 600-unit plants, total 1,200. Every so often, Malampaya has to go on maintenance. Now, every 3 years, Malampaya goes on a 30-day maintenance. And I always remember the years because they happen to be election year. 2007, 2010, 2013, when we had the price spikes, 2016. Otherwise, they go on 10-day maintenance, which is just a normal cleanup and repair of whatever has to be repaired. If KEPCO, use natural gas, I can produce 1,200 megawatts. But when I use biodiesel, I have to derate to 840 megawatts for several technical reasons. If they use pure diesel, they derate only to about 1,100. So that gives us an increase of roughly, how much is that? 1,000, 550, 130 each, so 260 more megawatts without spending. So they said, but the Biofuels Act prohibits the use of pure diesel in this country. So we're now asking Congress to grant the natural gas plants that exemption, so that during the short time when they have to go and use alternative fuels or alternate fuels, they can use pure diesel and give us more megawattage.
Will they use the diesel only for the 3-month period, or since there is no sunset provision, it is a permanent suspension?
It's permanent. In other words, we're saying that we want to optimize what we get from you guys. And there's no gain saying that next summer in 2016 we're again going to have a shortage, and we want you to be able to deliver more. So putting a sunset provision didn't make sense. Let them be forever exempted, because the thing that we're looking at is it was Mitsubishi who was telling them to derate to 420. Mitsubishi manufactured the turbines. So when they were having problems because there was a lot of clogging, biodiesel has water, and that's not good. Water accumulates, and it's also corrosive. And it jams the filter that Mitsubishi manufactured for that particular type of plant. And so Mitsubishi told them, you have to derate to 420 per plant, or total of 840. Sabi ko, ang laki naman ng gap. How do we recapture? And they said, pure diesel.
Which is more economically feasible, biodiesel or pure diesel, for those natural gas plants?
Price?
In terms of price. Diesel.
Diesel's cheaper than biodiesel.
Okay, so I see it clearly that it is only the Biofuels Act, but I am happy to note once again, and I'm glad that the good sponsor put it on record, that the Clean Air Act, most especially, has not been suspended.
We will never touch the Clean Air Act as long as Senator Lagarde is in this chamber.
Thank you. With that, I lend my full support, Your Honor, to this joint resolution, and would be happy to join you in the BICAM if you so decide.
Yes, certainly. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, at least 3 of our colleagues have indicated a desire to interpolate at a later date. So in view of that, may we suspend consideration of Senate Joint Resolution number 12 under Committee Report number 99. So move.
Any objection? Hearing none, so suspended.
Mr. President, I move that we suspend session for a few minutes.
Session is suspended for a few minutes.
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, with the consent of the Senate, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 2486 under Committee Report number 91.
Any objection? Consideration of Senate Bill number 2486 and a Committee Report number 91 is in order.
Mr. President, the parliamentary status of this measure is that we closed the period of amendments last February 9, 2015. I thus move that we open the period of individual amendments.
Period for individual amendments is in order.
I move that we recognize the sponsor, Senator Bam Aquino.
Senator Bamakino is recognized.
Mr. President, thank you for the opportunity to provide some individual amendments. On page 1, line 7, delete the word bill and replace it with the word act.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On page 1, line 9, insert a new subsection A to read as follows. Co-loading shall refer to agreements between two or more international or domestic sea carriers, comma, whereby a sea carrier bound for a specific destination agrees to load, comma, transport, and unload the container van or cargo of another carrier bound for the same destination, semicolon. And the subsequent subsections, Mr. President, shall be renumbered accordingly.
Any objection? Hearing none, carried.
Mr. President, on page 2, line 3, after the word export, delete the phrase in a container van of and replace it with the word by. The subsection shall now read as follows. Foreign cargo shall refer to import or export cargo carried by a foreign vessel. So move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On page 2, line 5, before the word container, insert the article A.
Approved.
On the same page, line 5, before the word whether, insert the punctuation comma.
Approved.
On the same page, line 6, delete the phrase import or export and replace with the phrase foreign.
Approved.
On the same page, line 6, after the word cargo, insert the punctuation comma. The subsection shall now read as follows. Foreign container van shall refer to a container van, comma, whether empty or loaded with foreign cargo, comma, which belongs to a foreign vessel, semicolon.
Any objection? Hearing none, carried.
On page 2, line 18, delete the phrase container vans and to import and export articles or cargoes carried in such foreign container van by a foreign vessel, and replace it with the phrase vessels carrying foreign container vans. It shall now read as follows, Mr. President. Section 3 scope, dash, this act shall apply exclusively to foreign vessels carrying foreign container vans, period.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On the same page, line 21, delete the phrase, this act shall allow the following circumstances, and replace it with the phrase, a foreign vessel. So moved, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On the same page, delete lines 23 to 26, and replace it with a new subsection A to read as follows. Letter A, arriving from a foreign port, comma, shall be allowed to carry a foreign container van or cargo to its domestic port of final destination, comma, after being cleared at its port of entry, semicolon. So move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On the same page, delete lines 27 to 29 and replace it with a new subsection B to read as follows. Letter B, arriving from a foreign port, comma, shall be allowed to carry foreign container van or cargo by another foreign vessel calling at the same port of entry to the domestic port of final destination of such foreign cargo, semicolon. So move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved. I'm sorry, I didn't see the... Yes,
It's okay. I don't mind that, Mr. President. It's okay. May I just ask the sponsor to go back to page 2, line 21, anterior amendment, Mr. President.
Okay. So
May-
we have approved the last amendment, individual amendment proposed, and that is on page 2, line deleting lines 27 to 28, and the amendment as read by the sponsor has been approved. So what is the pleasure of the gentleman?
I would just like to be clarified on the amendment that was proposed on page 2, line 21.
Line 21, all right?
Yes, the sponsor said that we delete this act shall allow the following circumstances. And he replaced it with foreign vessel. Is that right, Mr. President?
That's correct. That was the proposed amendment.
So how does the section 4 read now? Carriage of a foreign container van or foreign cargo by a foreign vessel, dash, foreign vessel.
1 minute suspension, Mr. President.
Madodoble ah.
Session is suspended for 1 minute.
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
If the distinguished sponsor won't mind, Mr. President, I think it was just overlooked a while ago, but he meant to do this. Instead of replacing this act, etc., with just foreign vessel, it should be a foreign vessel and then a colon.
Yes.
Then I will understand
All right.
precisely.
Yes, Mr.
Thank you.
President.
All right. The amendment of the Soto amendment is accepted by the sponsor. There being no objection, the same is hereby approved. We are
thank
now on lines
30 to 32. Mr.
30
President.
to 32 on page 2.
Before that, Mr. President, I'd like to thank the Minority Floor Leader for providing that clarification. Thank you. On the same page, delete lines 30 to 32 and replace with the new subsection C to read as follows. Letter C, departing from a domestic port of origin through another Philippine port to its foreign port of final destination, comma, shall be allowed to carry foreign container van or cargo intended for export, semicolon. So move, Mr.
Any
President.
objection? Hearing approved.
On the same page, read lines 33 to 34 until page 3, lines 1 to 3, and replace it with a new subsection D to read as follows. Letter D, departing from a domestic port of origin, comma, shall be allowed to carry foreign container van or cargo by another foreign vessel through a domestic transshipment port and transferred at such domestic transshipment port to its foreign port of final destination, period. So move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing approved.
Next, Mr. President, on page 3, delete lines 4 to 7 and replace it with a new paragraph to read as follows. For purposes of this act, an empty foreign container van going to or coming from any domestic port, comma, or going to or coming from a foreign port, comma, and being transshipped between two domestic ports shall be allowed, period. So move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing approved.
On page 4, line 23, after the title of section 12 on repealing clause, and before the word all, add the phrase section 1009 of Presidential Decree number 1464, comma, otherwise known as the Tariff and Customs Code of 1978, end. So section 12 on repealing clause, on the repealing clause shall now read as follows, Mr. President. Section 1009 of Presidential Decree number 1464, comma, otherwise known as the Tariff and Customs Code of 1978, and all laws, comma, decrees, comma, orders, comma, rules and regulations, comma, and other issuances, comma, parts thereof, comma, inconsistent with the provisions of this act are hereby repealed or modified accordingly, period. Mr. President, so moved.
Any objection? Hearing approved.
And finally, Mr. President, We would also like to propose to amend the title of this bill. We delete the title, An Act Exempting the Carriage of Container Vans from the provisions of Section 1009 of Presidential Decree Number 1464, otherwise known as the Tariff and Customs Code of 1978, and for other purposes, and instead replace it with the title, An Act Allowing Foreign Vessels to Transport and Co-Load Foreign Cargoes for Domestic Transshipment, and other purposes.
And
So
for
moved.
other purposes.
And for other purposes. So move, Mr. President.
Any objection to the change in the title of the measure? Hearing none.
That's all, Mr. President. Thank you.
Majority Leader,
Mr. President, I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 2486. So move.
before we suspend the consideration of the measure, the Secretary is directed to prepare a new version of the bill containing those individual amendments approved by the Chamber for purposes of our next session, where the period of individual amendments will be continued. On motion of the Majority Leader, the Senate Bill, consideration of Senate Bill 2486 is hereby suspended.
Mr. President, with the consent of the Senate, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill 2434 under Committee Report number 82. This is the Philippine Agricultural and Biosystems Engineering Bill, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, consideration of the measure is in order.
Mr. President, the parliamentary status of the measure is that we are in the period of individual amendments. However, there are no other senators who wish to propose their individual amendments on the measure. I thus move that we close the period of individual amendments.
Period for amendments is hereby terminated on Senate Bill number 2434.
I move that we approve Senate Bill 2434 under Committee Report number 82 on second reading.
Any objection? Hearing none. Senate Bill number 2434 is hereby approved on second reading.
I move that we suspend consideration of the said measure.
Consideration of the measure is hereby suspended.
Mr. President, before we adjourn some administrative matters, I move that we transfer the primary referral of the following Senate resolutions. Senate Resolution 1091, entitled Resolution Directing the Senate Committee on Accountability of Public Officers and Investigations, or Blue Ribbon, to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation into the alleged misuse of the Quick Response Fund, QRF, by the Department of National Defense, with the end in view of determining the status of these funds, intended to help victims of natural disasters, strengthening pertinent laws dealing with the use of public funds and for other purposes, and Senate Resolution 1093, entitled Resolution Directing the Proper Senate Committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the recent COA audit report that a substantial amount of the 352 million peso emergency fund of the Department of National Defense in 2013 had been allegedly misused by the military, to transfer from these resolutions from the Committee on National Defense and Security to the Committee on Accountability of Public Officers and Investigations, with the agreement of both chairpersons. I therefore so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
Mr. President, I move that we adjourn session until 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Monday, February 16.
Session is adjourned until Monday, February 16, 2015 at 3 o'clock in the afternoon.